how do you pronounce this word? And this one? And this one? How about this one? These French words come from a Reddit thread called "What are the French words that you find the most difficult to pronounce?" And I think this is a very interesting topic, why people think these words are specifically difficult to pronounce. As a French and English teacher, a French native and a professional linguist, I will, in this video, break down what makes French pronunciation, French phonetics, seem and feel difficult. One disclaimer before I start. First of all, the complex spelling system, all the silent letters, different graphemes for one phoneme in French, makes it confusing when you try to read French for the first time with no proper training or explanation on the spelling system and phonetics. I am not going to talk about the spelling system and written French. We are going to focus on phonetics and the sounds of French. In this video, I'm going to break down the biggest challenges in French pronunciation, and then I asked you in one post what words you find really difficult, really challenging to pronounce. So I'm going to explain what makes those words specifically difficult to pronounce, and also give you tips on how to master and how to improve French pronunciation. First of all, what is phonetics? Phonetics is the study of speech sounds. The French language has several phonetic features that are unfamiliar or non-existent in other languages, making it difficult for learners to perceive and differentiate and then produce some sounds. So what are the biggest challenges in French pronunciation? Let's break it down. First of all, we have 3 to 4 nasal sounds that are kind of unique to this language. The 4 nasal sounds are en, on, un, and in the southern part of France, so the bottom half of France, un. This sound is pronounced un in the upper part of France. So, for example, lundi in the south would be lundi in the north. When I was at university, our teacher of phonetics and grammar told us that people in the northern part of France had a difficulty to really differentiate between un and un. They hear, apparently, I don't know if it's really true, they hear the same thing. I really hear a difference because I'm from the bottom part of France. These nasal vowel sounds, they are produced by allowing air to get out of the mouth and the nose at the same time. You will need to send air from here, obviously, up your nose and down your mouth at the same time to be able to pronounce. That's what makes them nasal sounds. Many languages, including English, Spanish, German, do not have those nasal sounds, which means that learners who are natives of those languages often struggle to even hear or produce those sounds. They struggle to produce them because in the first place, they struggle to really differentiate between the sounds. Before you can produce a sound or reproduce a sound, you have to make sure that you really hear it correctly. The second biggest challenge in French phonetics is the R. The French R, as in rouge, is a voiced uvular, I'm not sure I pronounced this one correctly, uvular, I'm gonna write the word here, is a voiced uvular fricative sound. It's produced at the back of the throat using the uvula. I'm gonna put a picture here. The uvula is a little dangling piece of flesh that's at the back of your throat. Unlike the English R, like a red, or the Spanish R that is rolled, the French R is a fricative. There is some airflow going out that creates some friction. A fricative is a consonant sound that is produced by forcing air out of a narrow channel. That creates the friction, like the Z, you have some friction with the tongue, the V with the lips and the teeth, so the R. Big challenge for most learners of French. Even Germans, yes, I will talk about it later. Why Germans, who also have a fricative R, struggle to pronounce the correct R in French. Third challenge is vowel length and minimal pairs. Minimal pairs is when two words will differ by one sound only, and the vowel length and openness of the mouth would change slightly. Think about peur and père, dessous and dessus. They differ by one vocal sound, and that can lead to miscommunication if you don't pronounce those words correctly. And for some natives of other languages, it's really hard to really distinguish between those two words. For Spanish speakers, u and u the same thing, more or less. Another challenge in French pronunciation that is not just phonetics, and I have talked about it in other videos before, is the liaison. It makes you feel that French is just one big word because a lot of words are connected between the last consonant and the first vowel of two different words that are next to one another. These connections make French sound like a continuous stream of words. And for some people, it's hard to know where one word starts and one word ends. I think, and I've already talked about it at the start, the last big challenge in French pronunciation is the silent letters and the fact that you can't really rely on written French to know how a word is pronounced. So you have to use your auditory memorization to learn the language and to learn the pronunciation. So how does sound perception affect the pronunciation? One thing that the brain does is it classifies the sounds into categories based on our native language. If you don't have one of those French sounds that we talked about in your native language, you might struggle to hear this sound properly. For example, English speakers or even Spanish speakers struggle to hear the difference between U and U just because they don't have U in their native language, and then to reproduce the sound it's even more difficult. Spanish speakers confuse the letter E with the sound E because they don't have the sound E in Spanish, so every E, every E is pronounced the same. That's why the word cheveux would sound like cheveux. It's also the case for German people. They often know how to spell cheveux, so they see a E and they would pronounce it like in German. Those German speakers often have a really hard time hearing the difference between en and on. Because first of all, none of those sounds exist in German, and so they often hear exactly the same thing, but they use a similar combination of muscles inside the mouth, so the same effort is produced to be able to say those sounds, but the placement of the lips is the difference, and unless you specifically show them, explain how the lips are positioned to be able to articulate both of those sounds, they really struggle. I often spent a lot of time with my German students on those two specific sounds, trying to explain to them that on is an opening of the mouth but a closing of the lips, so the lip muscles are at play. On, whether en doesn't require any contraction, any usage of the lips. It's just an opening of the mouth. If you introduce un, that's a torture for a German native. So as I said, German speakers don't necessarily struggle with the R because the R sound already exists in German and it's very similar. It's also a fricative, but it's often too harsh when they try to pronounce it in French. This is what makes them sound German when they speak French. On the other side, English speakers really struggle to pronounce the R because what happens in the mouth is completely new to them. The fricative aspect of the R, completely new. One thing that I need you to stop doing, if that's what you're doing, is to stop trying to find your native sounds, native phonemes in French. It's a different melody, it's a different system. Some consonant sounds are gonna be very similar, like the v, the, t, okay? If you want to master French pronunciation, you will have to accept that there are some new sounds that you have to train, you have to practice. Solely relying on your phonetic system is not going to work. And that's why when Emily arrived in Paris, she thought that saying bonjour,
Bonjour. 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 Bonjour.
would do the thing. And for her, it probably even sounds exactly like bonjour. The thing she does is she pronounces everything as if it's an American word. She doesn't know the sound oo, so she tries to find the closest sound in her language, which is or. The R, American R, and the on is on. So she pronounces each letter individually like in American, like in English. So don't be Emily and try really to accept that French phonetics is French phonetics. I just want to touch on the critical period hypothesis. It's a theory that says that it's easier to learn phonetics in childhood because you have higher brain plasticity. However, it is not impossible as an adult to train your brain to really hear new sounds. sounds. You just have to be aware that there are new sounds. It's part of learning a language, especially if pronouncing words correctly and being understood is your goal. You might have to spend a little bit more time than a child who is learning the phonetic system for the first time. Articulation and muscle memory is also very important. I already talked about it a little bit before with the en and the on. Pronouncing foreign sounds or like French sounds requires to train different muscle groups. English speakers, German speakers. Obviously, I'm always talking about languages that I know. I don't know any Asian language. I don't know any Arabic. I don't know any Scandinavian language. So I'm sorry if I never talk about it. English and German natives often use their lips a lot less because their language requires it less. But if you want to speak French, you have to first of all open or position your mouth in a lot of different ways. And the lips position is going to vary a lot as well. We have the et, un. We have the o, on. My lips are contracted like a little O. We have the en, where the lips are completely relaxed. You have to practice and you have to accept that you can't just use your native language lip placement to speak French. We have more vocal sounds, so it requires to open the mouth more and to move the lips in a lot of different positions. So just like you work out at the gym, I would suggest to train your mouth the same way. For example, still English and German speakers, the rounding of the mouth seems awkward and they often have a problem doing it. Yesterday I was teaching a German speaker the different lip placement and it didn't come naturally for them, so they have to actively force themselves to place the lips like this. That is also why the words that I mentioned at the start of the video can be difficult to pronounce because they have a lot of vocal sounds like or yen, or I remember chirurgien was one of those most difficult words to pronounce for a lot of those Reddit people because we have I, U, yen. That's a lot of different lip placements in one word. And if you don't do this, then yes, you're going to struggle and you have the R in the middle. Practical tips. So how to improve your French pronunciation? First of all, your words that you submitted all have the same thing in common, is the R. And the R is difficult for everybody more or less to pronounce. Let me know in the comments if it's your case or if you find it super easy to pronounce. I'm also interested to know. One of you mentioned in the comments that they struggle to pronounce the R when it is at the start of a word. That, as a person who studied phonetics, I can tell you is because your vocal tract, so your tongue and your uvula, the little dangling thing at the back of your throat, are completely at rest before you say this phoneme. And they have to engage from a neutral position, which means you have to build up more pressure and it requires more precise control to create the correct friction sound. When the R appears between two vowels, it benefits from co-articulation, meaning the sound before and the sound after the R help shape its pronunciation. At the end of a word, it's often easier because the R is softened because it's at the end, so you don't have to force it too much. You don't really have to have a lot of friction in the throat. So, how to practice pronouncing the R? You'll have to go step by step. Start by trying to pronounce words where the R is the only consonant sound in the last syllable of the word, like douleur, couture, valeur, aventure, culture. If the word has one syllable, monosyllabic, it's even easier. Car, père, mère, tour, dur. The friction is very minimal, just have to let out a little bit of air but block it at the same time. Way to perfect this R before moving on to the next step, which is where the R is placed in the middle of the word. As I said, the sound before and the sound after help the production of this R. Try carotte, durable, terrible, paradis. Notice how my R's are not super rough. There's just a little bit of resistance, but I let out a bit of air. Then at the start of a word, râler, ranger, roman. This is more difficult because as we saw before, we start from a neutral position. We start from 0. And then the last step, which is the most difficult, pair it with another consonant sound like a t or d. Mettre, prendre, vendre, plâtre, traduire, bruit. These are often the most difficult words to pronounce. There was one comment on my post saying that they struggled to pronounce the word parle at normal speed, and they noticed that the r turned into a g, and it's most likely due to the co-articulation of the r and the l. When you have a r and the l together, if your R is not very stable and a little bit weak, your tongue anticipates the L and places itself. It's already moving towards the L sound, the L, and the back of the tongue may rise too much, which is turning the into a g. If you pronounce the g sound, you notice that the back of your tongue is up, trying to touch the palate. So that person would pronounce pagle instead of parle. So how to fix this problem? First of all, you have to slow down and exaggerate. Practice parle in slow and exaggerated speech before increasing speed. Another tip is to use the H trick. So try to say arle before parle to engage your uvula. So your uvula is already engaged. Another tip is to use the shadowing technique to listen and repeat native speakers say sentences. So use the parle in sentence. It might work also with music and songs. It's often easier to pick up the phonemes and the sounds in a song with melody. Work on your tongue placement. So make sure that your tongue does not try to touch the back of the palate when you're trying to say the R. It's not going to work. The air is going to be blocked already at the back of your tongue, at the back of your mouth. The third comment was the word encadrant with a D and a R. The person says that their D would sound too much like a T. So why does the D sound like a T? First of all, I want to say maybe this person is a German native. In northern languages, the D is often more fricative than in French, Spanish, or Italian. For example, at the end of a word in German, the D is less voiced, resulting in kind of like a T, like Hund, Abend. So I don't know if this person is a German native, but that could also explain it. The D is a voiced sound, which means you need your vocal cords to pronounce it. And when transitioning from the D to the R, the tongue must release from the teeth. The tongue is placed behind the teeth, but has to keep voicing engaged. And if the voicing drops too soon, the D will sound like a T. I have no use of my vocal cords, like in the R, no use of my vocal cords. So in anticipation, once again, of the R sound that is not voiced, the D sound that is voiced might turn into a non-voiced sound, T. So instead of saying encadrant, they would pronounce encadrant because the vocal cords stop vibrating a little bit too soon, too early. One tip that I could suggest to fix this problem would be to start by whispering the word, and you will notice that your D will sound like a T when you whisper because you don't use your vocal cords, and slowly increase the volume until you voice the D. So go by step, slowly, a little bit louder, until you can really hear a difference between the T and the D with the use of your vocal cords. I'm touching my throat too much now, I'm starting to hurt a bit. Another tip would be to separate the D from the R in a different syllables. So instead of saying encadrant, when you have to pronounce both sounds together, I would say, try to say encadurant. Doesn't mean anything, doesn't matter. The D is in du, the R is in rant. Try to pronounce those two sounds separately and then accelerate. Speed up the pace. Encadrant, 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 encadrant. The last tip, obviously, like I said before, use the shadowing practice to listen and repeat native sentences that you hear from native speakers or from songs. Once again, very useful to learn phonetics through songs. Other things you can do to improve your French pronunciation is to train your ear to hear better, to hear words that are very similar, but those minimal pairs that would differ by one sound, like bouche, bûche. Do you really hear the difference? Bouche, bûche. And then if you don't, focus on the lip placement. There are a bunch, now I think Google does that, they show you the lip, the mouth position, the lip position. Bouche is round, bûche is flat. If you really can't hear focus on the lip placement or the mouth opening. This is where the shadowing practice, I think it's the 5th time that I talk about this, but I love it, comes into play. And you can do this with songs, and you can do this with movies, with videos, with a lot of things. So once again, train your mouth like you train your biceps at the gym. As a non-French native, the muscle combinations that you need in French are just not developed yet. So be patient, but also be aware that you need to train them. You can use mirrors, recordings, you can film yourself and compare to native speakers. There's a lot of work that you can do. You can work with a professional. I do that sometimes when I really see a student struggle. Most of the time, my advanced students, they completely gave up on trying to master French pronunciation, and they have developed too much of a habit of saying one sound one way. This is really hard to correct after years of saying it this way. So as a beginner, I would say it's a bit frustrating. You want to speak, but focus a few hours to really master the pronunciation. The last tip, make sure to listen. Really listen to a lot of different types of content, different accents as well, and don't neglect music. If you manage to find French music that you enjoy, music for me was the best thing to be able to master English pronunciation. From the age of 11, when I got my first album in English, I think it was Madonna or Britney, I would spend hours trying to reproduce the melody and the sounds in my bedroom. And even though I had no idea what she was talking about, I was able to, in French we say, to make yogurt. So it's not saying actual words, but trying to reproduce the sounds. And I am convinced that music, and I listen to a lot of music, has helped me a lot to master English pronunciation. I am not perfect, obviously not. Training with audiobooks, podcasts, videos also helps the brain adapt to the French phonetics. Obviously, you don't need music, but it's always easier and more fun with music. I would say, yes, you can use the French subtitles, but here, that's not the goal. The goal is really to focus on spoken language. Otherwise, the French spelling might confuse you even more because you're trying to read with your native alphabet phonetic system in your head. You're trying to read French, and this is going to make everything more confusing. So focus on the sounds first and then move on to written French. I think we've all seen those reels of people imitating French people speaking, and even though they don't really know the words, they have the sound correctly. It's always like ah. All those vocal sounds are on point very often. So you can try to do that first before trying to articulate actual words. But if you are already at the level where you can say some words, I think all the tips that I gave here could be very helpful. Let me know if you try any of it. And I hope this video was helpful. This is pretty much all I have for you today. Share with me in the comments everything about all your thoughts about this topic of French pronunciation. Do you struggle? What's your native language and what is difficult to pronounce in French? And yes, don't forget, the French pronunciation, just like any other pronunciation of any language, is just about training your brain and your ear and your mouth muscle. I hope you enjoyed once again, and I reply to most comments, and I will see you later for another video. Bye!